Darth Melvin, you're bullying the children. I'm exposing them for being fake fans. They're not really Star Wars fans.
If I'm being honest, I didn't really have much thought on Skeleton Crew going into it. I never know how I feel about Jon Watts, one of the creators behind the show. He did the Spider-Man MCU trilogy, which is a decent trilogy of films, but I don't know. In my head, I always felt like those films are good in spite of Jon Watts and not because of Jon Watts. Perhaps I just tagged him as more of a workman with no creativity. Regardless, the show also starred kids. I don't actually follow show developments as they happen these days. Too many leaks, I would rather not be spoiled. So if there was a more clear picture released, I didn't know. So I went in fairly blind and I was sold pretty much instantly. Some man-children probably hate the show for starring 2 boys and 2 girls, with only one of the girls being white and one being a blue elephant that is not a Max Rebo.
Father-son bonding is great, but to do it on a YouTube channel to promote Disney Star Wars, that's terrible.
And look, I really could care less about the opinions of people who waste their lives hating a franchise they forgot to have time to even like, but I also think there is a slight irony that I see a lot of commentators and fans say, we want different things in Star Wars, that's why The Last Jedi was so good. Then when something different like this show comes out, which is unlike anything Star Wars has seen previously, they refuse to watch it. Whatever though, that is just my commentary on some Star Wars discourse. Gotta keep it current for the one time a year I make a video that's not totally out of date. The show was in active development since around late 2021 or 2022, with Jon Watts known to be involved with Jon Favreau, though each were attached in fairly vague capacities at the time. For a while, the show was rumored by supposed insiders to take place during the High Republic era, but was restructured to take place in the same era as shows like The Mandalorian or Ahsoka, a handful of years following Return of the Jedi, in the early years of the New Republic. With the show being a coming-of-age in the vein of Amblin's 80s coming-of-age films, think Gremlins, Goonies, or Back to the Future, that kind of thing. Despite the ball not rolling until 2022, really, the show was actually conceptualized and pitched earlier, around the time Jon Watts released Spider-Man Homecoming in 2017. At the time though, as a film, since the strategy for Star Wars at that time was to make a shit ton of spin-off films, before Disney Plus facilitated a way to create smaller shows for the small screen on streaming, which perhaps fit better for this desired narrative. Kathleen Kennedy, though, the bane of the modern Star Wars incel's existence.
The real fans want to see an NC-17 rated Game of Thrones style Old Republic content, but did Disney give us this? No. Instead, we got a shit-ass sequel trilogy where Luke Skywalker and Emperor Palpatine's characters were reduced to the level of clown.
While she's an aging Hollywood producer, which means out of touch and probably calls IT to help her plug in her keyboard, she did actually work her way up to the role as the head of Lucasfilm, producing a lot of films with Amblin and Steven Spielberg, including Gremlins, The Goonies, and Back to the Future. You know, the same things I cited as influences for this show. She may not know much about Star Wars and may have some terrible judgment in terms of some of her studio decisions, but it's fair to say this kind of pitch kind of merged her background with her current day job, leading to this decidedly different Star Wars project to actually get made and not just announced and shadow canceled like half the other shows that are announced for Star Wars these days. For casting, they assembled 4 competent teenagers to play our young protagonists. Judd Watson is sort of the star power of the series in a mysterious Force user role. And of course, Jaleel White, Urkel himself, or Sonic for us who grew up in unstable childhood homes, to play the pirate henchman.
Smoking's bad for you, you know.
No, it's not. Try it.
Whoa, little bro. That smoke will make you choke.
The show was shot in 2022, concluding in early 2023, with the crew taking all of 2023 and much of 2024 to stitch and edit the whole thing together for release. The story of Skeleton Crew takes place in 9 ABY, following the events of Return of the Jedi in the same era as shows like The Mandalorian or Ahsoka. The show starts on At-Aten, a planet not too dissimilar to Earth, where a young boy, Wim, finds a Republic-era spaceship buried in the ground near his home. Investigating it with his friend Neil, the Blue Elephant Man, that's not a Max Rebo, as some girls, Fern and KB, show up to try to stake claim to the mysterious ship for themselves. This is until all 4 kids are blasted off into space. On the ship, they meet an old droid, SM-33, who was a pirate droid that worked under Tak Renaud, who was looking for the spoils of At-Aten, a world known to the wider galaxy to have treasure, though it's thought to be a myth by many. Soon they blast off and land on a pirate planet where they meet a group of pirates pursuing them for their chance at Old Republic currency, something particularly rare since the initial collapse of the Republic decades earlier that these kids somehow have. The kids meet Jod Na Nawood, a Force sensitive who claims to be able to help the children as he is supposedly a long-lost Jedi. The kids travel with Jod and meet a giant owl lady who tells them not to trust Jod. Then they go to the war-torn variant of At-Aten that has coordinates the real deal, though those coordinates were destroyed by SM-33 back in the day, who has a PTSD flashback to his old life, which leads him to try to kill the kids and Jod, until they could restore him back to his normal loving self. The coordinates are lost, but SM-33 can take them to his old master's base on Lanupa. There they find Tak Renaud's fortune, though the place is booby-trapped. Jod finds a lightsaber and threatens the kids, though they escape, but get stuck on the planet, needing to navigate back to their ship. They manage to, but are almost pulled apart while escaping a garbage-smashing machine. Jod teams up with the pirates, who have been pursuing the kids throughout the show, and manages to kill their leader Brutus, becoming the new leader of the pirates and capturing the children by saber point, revealing why he has Force abilities, saying that during the Jedi Purge he met a Jedi who was in hiding, who eventually was hunted down and killed in front of his eyes after training him for a short while. Since then, he realized the galaxy was basically fucked. Anyways, the kids and Jod make it to At-Aten, and Jod sees the treasure of At-Aten with his own eyes, or at least a portion of it, as they have over 1,000 such vaults. He holds the kids and their parents hostage, eventually convinces Fern's mom to remove the planet's shield and cloaking, leading to a pirate attack on the colony. This eventually is stopped when the kids work to get a transmission to the New Republic to help with a squad of X-Wings stopping the takeover of At-Aten, and Jod yielding to the children. Wim gets our adventure kicked off, being the kid that finds the spaceship in the first place. He's a normal kid who you'd expect from a coming-of-age tale like this, who runs into some extraordinary events which causes him to blast off into space. He's an optimist and dreams of the best outcome, kind of the opposite of Fern, but we'll come back to that. Wim at times sees the darkness in the galaxy but hopes to make it a better place. As he traverses the story, he definitely becomes more sure of himself, and despite seeing contradictions to his optimistic outlook, really comes around to see the good in the galaxy as well, hoping to contribute to improving it rather than make it darker like Jod had when he embraced, for lack of a better term, the shitty side of the galaxy. Neil is his best friend and is not a Max Rebo. The creators made that very, very clear. Also, he's less greasy than Max, who oozes this strange, almost sexual sheen out of him. Anyways, Neil is similar in his optimism to Wim, though unlike his friend is never doubting the good in people, which leads to some issues for him occasionally, but also makes him the heart and the anchor to the group, as even in the darkest times, Neil is willing to get the group to look on the positives and keep venturing into the unknown despite its dangers. Fern is the main female lead opposite Wim, who kind of has a tough guy attitude that isn't 100% warranted. She really wants to be taken seriously as a leader and often disregards her best friend KB as a result, and is competitive to a fault with the boys. Also eventually becoming a bit unsure about her leadership as thing after thing goes wrong throughout the story. Eventually she learns to be a good leader who learns to build up their people and not fight with them. She also learns to value her friends more and starts confidently making the hard calls, showing more compassion for her team. KB is Fern's friend, a part cyborg, with issues that occasionally hold her back as a result.
It's enough. It'll have to be.
She, like Neil, is optimistic, and she really starts doubting Fern as Fern never takes her issues into account. She also has some confidence problems that she overcomes throughout the show, and is kind of their pilot and does stuff like that. Jod is a pirate and just a general problem that has gone by many, many names and is basically robbing, stealing, and grifting to survive. He's definitely conflicted as a character at times, showing some care, albeit a little bit of rough care for the kids.
Your rewards, weapons, hides.
These four, the little ones.
But at the end of the story, he really just looks out for himself, even taking over Ad Adden for the treasures it holds. He is sort of a villain, but I hope the show gets a second season to expand on him, since by the end of the show he kind of walks off, but he has an interesting backstory, being trained briefly by a Jedi in hiding, only to turn his back on the light and become an opportunistic thug. He reminds me a bit of Set Hearth from the Darth Bane trilogy of novels, being a man that learns the ways of the Jedi, but turned his back on that due to his circumstances. Not really a Sith, but still using the Jedi powers for greed and as a way to get ahead in an unfair galaxy. SM-33 is the group's grumpy, swashbuckling pirate companion. I like the idea that this show's pirates are pirates in like a Pirates of the Caribbean sense, like it's all fun and games, running around and adventuring and whatnot. Exactly what a show like this should portray, and frankly, a Pirates of the Caribbean style show set in Star Wars is a surprisingly good marriage of concepts. Tonally, Skeleton Crew is fun. That is probably the easiest way I can think to put it. Clearly, John Watts and Christopher Ford envisioned this very Amblin-esque slice of the Star Wars universe. The thing I really appreciate about this show is that I feel like this style of coming-of-age story has really been replaced with superhero shit, I guess. We just don't see them as often as we once did, and it's kind of fun to get this easy, lighthearted adventure film about a bunch of kids in way over their head. Of course, there are some darkish moments and scary-ish moments, as was kind of the standard in those Amblin-style films. I think this show, as a result, would work well for kids. I would have eaten this up back in the day. And I also think as an adult, I would appreciate it for being creative and having awesome adventure set pieces. I mean, as a kid, I sat through the Star Wars prequels like at least once a week, so I probably would have loved this shit if I'm being totally honest. Also, I don't always talk much about the acting and performances, but I think it's worth pointing out that the kids in these shows were very consistent and pretty talented. I think there was a moment here and there that was a bit unnatural, but what do you expect? They're kids. It was very much like how those Harry Potter kids had some weird moments, but ended up all being pretty good actors down the line, you know? So I think they had some potential, and I think they did a good job leading the show. Clearly some talent, and the Skeleton Crew itself had a really fun dynamic, which made me care for all four of the characters. Mick Ganciino did the music for this show, and man, this dude came out of nowhere. He is most notable for this show and the newish Penguin show from just a few months ago. Anyways, the music is different from traditional Star Wars, less epic, and I think that's good. Much like the other Disney Plus shows, I think the Star Wars universe somehow learns the best way to make Star Wars music that isn't just a copy of John Williams, but still fits in with the musical thesis of Star Wars as a whole. It's solid enough, and I'm sure we'll see more of Mick Giacchino down the line. John Watts directed several episodes of the show, as you could imagine, but had some really solid guests as well. David Laurie, who directed The Green Knight, a film I absolutely fucking love. The Daniels, a duo of directors who directed Everything Everywhere All at Once, a film that I also fucking love, and also won Best Picture 2 years ago. Jack Schreier, who, I'll be honest, I never heard of this guy before, but I guess he's doing the Thunderbolts film. Lee Isaac Chung, who just directed the totally epic Twister films with Glenn Powell. And that's not ironic. That film was really fun, despite it being just a hair stupid. And Bryce Dallas Howard, who needs no introduction. She directed a ton of Star Wars stuff. Her dad was Opie from the Andy Griffith Show, who would go on to star in George Lucas's American Graffiti and then eventually direct the Solo film, which is like the only film that George Lucas put any input on because he wanted to visit his buddy Ron on set. Basically, she and her dad are George's extended family and do great work in the Star Wars universe these days, with editors Andrew Eisen, who worked on a bunch of Disney Star Wars stuff, Terrell Gibson, who worked with Disney a lot and worked on the fun film Ready or Not, and Catherine Najaro, who did Free Guy and Stranger Things. Much like the other Star Wars shows, I like the editing, so there's not much to complain about. I think it definitely has that old 70s Star Wars vibes with the wipes and stuff, but the general speed and stuff is definitely utilizing more modern techniques in editing. Sean Porter, who worked on The Old Man for FX with John Watts and David Klein, known for coming up with the filmmaker Kevin Smith, shooting his early films like Clerks, but most recently working on The Mandalorian, both shot episodes of the show. What I really like about this show is that each of the planets the kid visits looks vastly different than the last. It's well shot and each episode looks different. Some of the effects in this show are incredible while others are a bit subpar, but for a TV show I think it looks pretty good. I can't complain too much, and it has a relatively smaller budget than some of the other Disney Star Wars shows. Other aspects I love are the pirate designs. It often looks pretty practical, with designs pulled straight from early Star Wars films like A New Hope, with a mix of other creatures like Rhodians, Ithorians, and shits, the werewolf guys, and more, filling up the cruise. I also think it was interesting that AT-AT was similar to Earth. Kids play with toys, eat cereal, and have few cares. Parents have 9-to-5s, kids take the bus and ride bikes to school. It's very Earth-like. AT-AT feels like Star Wars set in suburban America, which is both amazing and kind of weird. I've read and listened to and watched lots of Star Wars media, and it's very rare that you actually see the lives of common folk in the galaxy. Not unheard of, but just really rare. So I always appreciate when it pops up, and this is just a story about 4 normal kids who end up on an adventure. They're not the chosen one or Jedi or bounty hunters. They're just kids, and that's kind of cool. What I think is awesome about this show is that it subverts expectations but isn't stupid and underexplained like The Last Jedi was. It's something totally new for Star Wars. It also never feels the need to have like Luke Skywalker or the Mandalorian show up for a cameo. It's very isolated and can be enjoyed without needing to watch the Clone Wars or Rebels or the Mandalorian Ahsoka or even the films for that matter. This show was meant to be a jumping on point for the Star Wars universe, and I think it works brilliantly without needing any context before or after, and this very well could introduce a new generation of kids to Star Wars, that is, if it didn't flop. The story also wraps up well, with open ends, but also ending pretty cleanly. I think this is one of those shows where you could easily make a second season and have lots to explore, or they could put the project to rest and it would still work well as a one-off, not too dissimilar from how the first Star Wars film worked back in the day, which I think is a smart way to do it. Open up too many ends for something that's not going to happen and fans are going to be kind of annoyed, then I'm going to read some fucking novel trying to explain it when honestly I could give a fuck less. Overall, I really like this show. It is in the rank of stuff like Solo in the first season of The Mandalorian for me in my Disney Star Wars ranking, slightly above things like the second season of The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan, and The Force Awakens. Everything else is pretty much garbage, though admittedly I haven't seen Ahsoka or Andor. It looks good, it's a fun idea, and throughout canon and legends, books, TV, and film, you won't find something else in the galaxy far, far away anything like this. I really enjoyed it, and honestly, it could be one of the most fun things Star Wars has made in several years. But everyone always says, Star Wars is a big galaxy, why don't we have some variety? Then fail to watch shows that aren't based on Jedi, with skeleton crew blatantly underperforming. The show costed about $136 million, which is fairly meager for a Star Wars project, I suppose, and did alright, but it didn't blow up the streaming charts by any means, only topping the first week of its premiere, but having a pretty hard drop off to about 3rd or 4th in the streaming lists in subsequent weeks, which is not great for a big IP project. The show did well critically though, getting a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 72 out of 100 on Metacritic. Look, The Acolyte sucked ass, as I covered on this channel. Check out my Star Wars playlist, it has a bunch of videos. But I was really happy to basically dance on its grave. This show, on the other hand, was amazing end to end, and I would love to see more. It had a star-studded group of talent behind the camera as we covered, and even Kathleen Kennedy seemed to get this project well enough to not meddle with it too much or force too much cross-promotional stuff. The characters are great, the worlds are cool, and the show is beautiful. I also think it works wonderfully for all audiences, so if I piqued your interest, check it out. Who knows if a second season will happen, but whether or not it does, I'm still happy we got this one really good self-contained season of this wonderful little adventure in the Star Wars universe.